Hello and welcome to today's episode of Tisky Sour. Today I'm joined by Aaron Bastani, co-founder of Navarra Media and co-host of Tisky Sour. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm
Sorry about that. We are back. I don't know whose fault that was, but don't blame Gary in the comments. You know, he tries his best and he's an incredibly talented video editor and video live streamer, but it's something called Wirecast that's apparently screwing us over.
I sabotaged the live stream because I didn't feel that my cheekbones looked good enough. So sorry, guys. I had to re-up on the highlighter. But now we're back, bitch.
Excellent. As I was saying, I don't know what you heard before, but anyway, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani and Ash Sarkar. You know that now. We normally start the show with a soft topic. On Monday, we tried talking about football, which didn't work very well because you need two people to have a conversation, and I haven't watched a game in about 3 years.
So
it was
a
somewhat
conversation about
one-sided.
football without me.
Yeah, I mean, it would have worked much better with you, Ash.
The Navarra Media resident ultra.
It's true.
What football team do you allegedly support?
Well, we're talking about football again. Well, my dad supports Sheffield Wednesday. And so I did support them a bit when I was younger, but then they got relegated. I also sort of stopped watching football. They were sort of like linked. He's not even from Sheffield, so like we'd go to the games and it'd be like, I don't know what I've got to do with this team, but what can you do? And Leighton Orient, obviously.
Hipster.
But I don't know if you heard how Aaron was. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, actually.
I think the feed might have cut out before they heard how you're doing, and everyone's going to be desperate to know.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm doing really well. I'm buoyed by this astonishing poll, which we're going to be starting today's show with, I guess, about how popular Jeremy Corbyn is. Actually, it revived my faith in the great British public, because number one was David Attenborough. Actually, apart from Prince Harry, and let's be frank, Prince Harry is infinitely preferable to Prince William. The top five are pretty good people. The top five men, top five women. And yeah, I was gladdened to see that. The weather is still terrible. We at Navarra Towers are doing great. I'm still just, inspired by the weekend defeat of Manchester City. We've had two great evenings of Champions League football.
True.
Probably the best 2 nights of consecutive football I've ever seen in my life.
Always gets to this point. Like this point in the season, you're not going to get a boring match. Like when you couple the Premier League run in with Champions League semi-finals, etc., always good.
No, but
always quality.
The Roma Barca match and then the Real Juve matches,
that was special.
That
was something really special.
Wow. Anyway, let's not bore our viewers with base things like.
No, that was good. That sounded real pro. You sound like two people that really know about football.
Yeah, because I actually follow football.
Hey, we should do like a football podcast. There's a huge market.
There is a huge market for it. Yeah. There's a lot out there, though.
Like, I would have a no-gooners rule.
I don't know if it's where our comparative advantage is at the moment.
But what do we want to actually talk about?
Well, today, so what I was saying at the beginning, our soft topic to begin this show is a new YouGov poll, which has just been released and tells us the world's most admired people in 2018. There's also a breakdown by country. We'll talk about the UK in a bit, but we're going to start with the world. Ash, have you seen the results? Do you know who is number one?
So, number one, Bill Gates, the most boring man on the planet.
Donates a lot to charity.
I'm sure he does.
Including Haiti, right? Which was really screwed up.
I guess.
And other things and something.
I guess the metrics of admiration by gender I found really interesting. So in terms of the men, you could always identify what their jobs were. The women seem to be there kind of a little bit more by persona. So Angelina Jolie, Michelle Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Queen Elizabeth II, whose major achievement is not being dead yet. It's true.
That's on Guido. Alex Wickham, get it up, mate. There you go.
No, to be honest, it's impressive to live.
Ash Sarkar is a Republican shocker.
Let's timestamp this. No,
fine. And yeah, so women who kind of occupied that field of like professionalized affective labor in some way, you know, it's very personality driven. Men, they're very much by their jobs. I was very surprised by how high up President Erdogan at number 19, I believe. New entry. And in terms of at number 15, Michael Jordan, as a new entry, I can't believe that that's Michael Jordan of Chicago Bulls fame. Is this Michael B. Jordan?
I think it's probably that Michael Jordan.
No, it can't be. It has to be the old Michael Jordan.
Well, unless basketball just got big in a new country that it wasn't big in before.
You don't know what brown countries are like, Michael. You go to Afghanistan, they'll be like, "Who's your hero?" They'll be like, "Sylvester Stallone," because like the Rambo movies are still huge. So...
Everyone knows that Steph Curry is the GOAT. I don't think anyone's saying Michael Jordan, and everyone has seen Michael B. Jordan's abs in Black Panther. I choose to believe that's Michael B. Jordan.
People should have got over David Beckham by now as well.
They should have.
I mean, he is going down. He's gone down 2 places since last year.
But Donald Trump at number, what was he, 17 or something?
Number 17,
fairly high up. Again, surprising, but then you also think about how poll participation is often driven in quite a trolly fashion.
Well, I think one of the most important things to appear on any of these lists is you have to be really fucking famous. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you're one of the most famous people in the world, then you'll probably end up on this list somewhere or another.
Or infamous, albeit. It's probably a better word for him right now, isn't it? Unless you're in Russia. He was actually very popular in Russia.
So, yeah, Obama was more popular than Trump in every country apart from Russia, where Trump came 1 place ahead of Obama.
Cool. All right, calm down, Joanne Reid.
That was my thought about it, yeah.
But, okay, all right. So you were saying reasons to be cheerful, breakdown by country. In the UK, if I had to guess by most popular man in the UK, other than my esteemed co-hosts, Stormzy would make it to number 1 for me. He's a national treasure.
He doesn't appear.
What?
Well, David Attenborough's number 1. Aaron's already said that.
For fuck's sake, all right, yeah.
Barack Obama's number 2. Queen Elizabeth, who apparently the only thing she's achieved is still being alive. She's number 1. She's got a 20%
done a Nazi
admiration
in
score.
adulthood.
I think you guys are being unfair on Queen Elizabeth II.
Are you doing like a woke royalist turn?
No, I'm a Republican, but I mean, you know, there's very few monarchies which have survived since the 1950s to today.
What's the pity?
Well, no, of course, but then she's obviously done something, right? She's still revered amongst the domestic public, in spite of the fact that if we did like a comparative political analysis, pretty much everywhere else they've been booted out. So she must be doing something right.
Yeah, she didn't do a Nazi salute in adulthood.
Well, no, but as a Republican, but this is my point about, you know, how we should interpret that data as Republicans. When she goes, I think we have a phenomenal opportunity to catalyse a conversation about what kind of polity we'd like to be.
It's interesting, actually.
Which is a republic.
Prince Charles isn't even in the top 20.
He's hated.
So he's going to be in trouble. I like that Britain prefers Prince Harry to Prince William. I always have. I think that's sort of like the banterous nature of
everyone's always like, "Oh, naughty Harry." Everyone likes a bit of. Did I tell you about the time that I had to do the Royal Engagement television appearance for Channel 5?
No.
So
did you meet them? What is the Royal Engagement? What does that mean? Sorry, explain.
So when it was announced about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, I tweeted, "Look, I actually don't give a shit about the Royal Engagement, but I will concoct an opinion for money." And then immediately a Channel 5 producer added me and was like, "Are you free this evening?" So I was like, "Sure thing." So I went on and I thought it was just going to be like a news segment about the royal family and like a modern democracy. It was a Channel 5 news special about the Royal Engagement. I shit you not. And they had me on with a royal biographer and a planner of celebrity weddings. So it was these two and me. And in the green room, they were watching Wrapped while Prince Harry gave this interview, and I remember the royal biographer turned to me.
Who's this?
I can't remember her name, but she's got dark hair. You could.
Oh, the strange lady from the Telegraph.
I don't know if she's from the Telegraph.
Strange lady.
I mean, I don't know. To be a royal biographer, I think you have to have a very narrow field of interests.
Was she on Twitter? She's really odd.
I can't remember her name. I honestly can't remember her name. But if I went back through my tweets and found that date. So she was like watching this interview and she went to me, "Wow, you know, Prince Harry, he's every girl's guilty pleasure, isn't he?" And before I could stop myself, I was like, "Nah, mine's autoerotic asphyxiation." And nobody laughed apart from me. And the TV appearance only got more awkward from there. I got told off for calling the royal family tax avoiders.
Which they are. I mean, they're worse because they don't just avoid it, they get it.
Camilla Tominey.
It wasn't Camilla Tominey. I would remember her because I was questioning her.
Was it Sarah Bradford?
I don't know the names of royal biographers. It was honestly one of the most excruciating experiences of my life. So I find this woke recuperation of the royals as personalities very weird. Again, Prince Harry, the naughty one. Yes, I imagine he's great fun at Mahiki. Remember when he was on film calling someone a packy? Because I remember that.
That is true. That
Hey, one of his comrades. No, he called him a raghead as well.
Yeah, I remember that. That's our little packy friend, Ahmed.
He wasn't even referring to the enemy. He was talking to the guys that were fighting alongside him.
But the defence was that's just banter. That's
well, it is. I mean, that is also true. But
very
that doesn't
present
make it
in the
any more
British Army.
acceptable.
Well,
Yeah,
it's also
try it in my manner,
worrying about the
Hazza.
British Army, right?
So yeah, I'm not all for the recuperation of royals. But what's the reason to be cheerful? Because so far you've told me David Attenborough, who's a Malthusian, and the Queen, who's
David, he's okay. David Attenborough's okay. He's
a Malthusian.
He's not Erdogan.
He's not okay.
He's not like displaced hundreds of thousands of people.
So here we've got David Attenborough. What do we like about David Attenborough? He's not Erdogan. Great.
Well, so look,
very soothing
Prince
voice.
Charles could be the next sovereign of this country, and he's nowhere. Okay, Jackie Chan is ahead of Prince Charles. So, like I say, as a Republican, this is really interesting.
Who?
Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan. We'll do it. Jackie Chan is more popular than Prince Charles. Look, who else? Xi Jinping is more popular than Prince Charles. So, like I say, as Republicans, we've got a huge opportunity because, okay, Charles is 70, and the presumption is that, oh yeah, he won't be a royal for long. But look, the reality is, healthcare in the West is very good now, and if you're the King of England,
and rich people live longer,
it's going to be the best you can possibly imagine. So, Charles could be the monarch for 20, 25 years. So there will be a big opportunity, like I said, for Republicans. So that's why I'm happy. Also, Jeremy Corbyn in at number 5.
He's sandwiched in between Prince Harry and Bill Gates at number 5.
Highest ranking politician in the country.
That's social climbing I can get on board with.
Theresa May is number 11th.
I mean, so there was that
Number
image
11.
that was...
Number 11.
Michael went to Oxford, he's now at the LSE, he's saying number 11. What greater
What are you
indictment
supposed
on
to
the
say, the
higher
number 11?
education
Yeah, he's number 11.
system
or
could you have?
She's
11.
come 11th.
Well, you know
In
what?
the league.
I was thinking about this today because there was that image that was released of Jeremy Corbyn surrounded by teens. Everyone looks happy, elated, delighted. Lots of teens taking selfies near him. And there's a really palpable sense of energy. And I was thinking about it and I was looking at it. I was actually feeling really quite moved, which is strange for me. Notoriously flint-hearted. I actually felt really moved because I was like, you know what? I cannot remember in my political lifetime a sense of elation like this. I mean, maybe Blair winning in 97 was that, but this real kind of like organic sense of connection. And the politics of hope, the politics of joy, these things are tenuous and they're really precious when you have it. So it's fine if you looked at that picture and, I don't know, for instance, cried on the bus.
Oh, I like that. And Aaron, with your eagle eye for the fake news media, you thought something was spun about this survey, about this poll that was unfair to our boy.
Well, yeah, so in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn was coming above Theresa May. But then, of course, in the global poll, Theresa May comes ahead of Jeremy Corbyn because she's the Prime Minister of Britain. She's a female, not head of state, but a female political leader. So, of course, the biased MSM had to talk about the international poll where she finishes above Jeremy Corbyn rather than, clearly, the more relevant one, if we're talking about electability, the British one, where Jeremy Corbyn did very well, and she didn't do so well. So, that was an interesting spin on it. I think 5 for Jeremy Corbyn is just absolutely phenomenal. Bear in mind, literally a year ago, he was, by many measures, the least popular politician in British history. So, a lot can change. Yeah?
If you had to give us, in 3 words, why people warm to Jeremy Corbyn, what would those 3 words be?
Ooh. Cheeky?
Yeah?
Is he cheeky? I don't know.
Is he cheeky?
He's got, you know what? He's got a snaggletooth, which...
He's warm. Come on, he's warm.
Like, one can infer cheekiness from a snaggletooth.
Me?
Yeah?
Consistent, values-driven.
Consistent, values-driven. You've got cheeky, you've got 2 more words.
Oh, I thought... No, let's do one each. Come on.
Yeah? Okay, because I've got 3 words.
Okay, you go for your 3.
Werther's Originals Granddad.
Nailed it.
Oh, yeah,
You should work for like an ad agency or something.
I know. God, I want to...
They'd be like, what's that thing with, Jeremy Corbyn? And you're like, Werther's Originals.
You know what? I cannot wait to sell my principles. I've really been looking to sell out. I can't wait to cash in.
You could get him up to number 3 next year, I reckon.
Man, that's it.
Nah, my principles are going to go for £6 and a curly whirly.
No. You get him up to number 3 in the chart.
Okay, all right, I can do that. Jez, hire me.
Hold on, let's just see this. What's this crackle down here?
Oh, there's my boots. Sorry.
Oh, it's your book. Okay, no, that's fine. I just thought, we hadn't unpacked the.
No. These are my sequined boots, which I've been.
Is it the sequence?
Yes, the sequence. It's like when Dorothy is like clacking her heels together. It's like there's no place like home. It's me wishing I was anywhere but here.
This is where the Navarra Millions go. And if you want to add to the Navarra Millions, if you'd like us all to have sequined boots, go to support.navarramedia.com. Help us build a new media for different politics, and also all have sequined boots because without you guys, how can we do it? Right? I mean, for me, actually, it would be like, let's be real. It would be on some like really outstanding protein supplements. Michael, what's the money going on when it comes in?
My money?
Yeah.
Quite into Huel at the moment. It's quite cheap the first time because you get £10 off, but I suppose I could just get a new account next time I need to update it.
This is true. I need to pay for a private investigator.
I want to go on holiday.
Hey, this is cool. Right, so in the US, the most popular contemporary politician in the US is, apart from Donald Trump, because he's the president, Bernie Sanders.
Of course it is. Bernie
Sanders is more popular than, there's no other, John McCain's down there, there's no other sort of competitor. You'd think Liz Warren or something.
Where's Beyonce?
Liz Warren's nowhere. That's amazing. You think Liz Warren on the women would be doing really well?
Yeah, Beyonce's not there on the women either, which is surprising.
Is wrong with so then that in terms of the bias polling,
Liz Warren is below Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley.
That's wild.
And Melania Trump. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders is ahead of Liz Warren.
That's crazy.
Wow, that is
so
interesting.
What's on the agenda, Brenda?
So we're going to move on from incredibly famous celebrities who are admired or less admired by the world's population, and we are going to move on to the much more serious issue of whether or not the West is going to intervene in Syria. So obviously this potential build-up to Western intervention has been in response to the use of chemical weapons on the weekend in Douma, which is one of the last rebel-held towns in eastern Ghouta, which is one of the last rebel-held areas in Syria. We might be able to get up a map actually to show where that is for some context, but whether or not that comes up now. Sorry, when I turn around, it's because the TV screen's behind me.
And we've got Eastern Ghouta.
This is a great image from, was it Al Jazeera?
Yeah.
Yellow is YPG held. Red is Assad held. Can we keep that up a second longer? Is Assad held, and then the sort of light green is the FSA. Turquoise is Turkey in combination with Salafist militants, which is obviously Afrin, which was previously held by the Kurdish YPG. Who are I think we should be supporting them. We did a great show on this a couple of weeks ago.
And the current state of play is that, so you can see that in those green areas, that's the current places where the rebels are still in control, getting smaller and smaller. Assad's tactic seems to be, Assad's tactic is to attack and bomb those places.
This isn't the BBC. You don't need to hedge any vaguely controversial statement.
Until the rebels who are in control surrender, and then they move to a different area which is rebel held. So this is sort of like a slow, but it looks at this point steady, but also brutal method of the regime taking back control of the whole of Syria one by one in each of these areas by bombing it until they surrender. And in this case, chemical weapons were used to achieve that end.
So in terms of the UK political response, where are we at?
So in terms of the UK political response, where are we at? Well, at the moment, we seem to be following the lead of the Americans. So there was a cabinet meeting today where the UK government did a statement, which is that they're currently in line with what France and what the USA are thinking. And the implication there is that they probably would back some kind of military action. And military action at this point, we don't know exactly what that would look like, but we know that last year when Assad used chemical weapons, Donald Trump sent some Tomahawk missiles to bomb some airfields, the idea being that that's a proportionate response to sort of change the incentive structure so that Assad is less likely to use chemical weapons in the future. Something like that might be on the cards this time, although there are also a bunch of pundits and advisors saying that it needs to go a bit further this time because the one last year was quite ineffectual. As ever, part of this diplomacy is happening by Twitter. So for the latest American position, can we get up Donald Trump's first tweet in the script?
Perfectly reasonable and, considered
response.
I'm sure.
Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming. Nice and new and, open quotation marks, smart, exclamation mark, close quotation marks. You shouldn't be partners with a caps lock, gas, killing, animal. He kills his own people and enjoys it, exclamation mark. So,
how many retweets did that get? I got a lot of retweets that.
Besides the punctuation party on Twitter, and in terms of the American response, I think that there are some questions that I'd like to see us engage with, which is one, fundamentally, how different does this approach seem to that which has come before? You mentioned the Tomahawk missile strike last year. In terms of UK commitment to backing America in terms of airstrikes intervention, and also France, how new is that? And then the second thing is, what's Labour's position on this? Because this is something which comes up a lot, actually, for us on Novara, which is, you know, what's your position on Syria? And when people say, what's your position on Syria, that is actually a very, very narrow question about what is the scope of UK military intervention in Syria. That's what that question normally means. Because when I've answered it by really focusing on what I know and what I feel most comfortable talking about, which is the absorption of refugees, that's seen as an evasion of the question, even though that's obviously a response to Syria. So those two things. How different is this as a response, and what's Labour's position?
Do you want to go, Aaron?
I'll answer the second one. I mean, I won't evade it. I'll say something which is deeply unpopular with many people. Clearly, Assad is the only person that's going to win. Clearly. Any intervention which attacks him just protracts the conflict, leads to more deaths. In addition to that, any solution will be political. The problem is for the West, well, there's two problems, in fact. There's not a recognition of the solution being political, and if there is, it won't include Assad, which is just living in fantasy land. Secondly, there is a real sort of just a chaotic melange of competing interests. So the UK and the US, obviously, in the past have wanted to work alongside the FSA. ISIS was the enemy. Assad is the enemy. Iran is working against ISIS, but against Assad, and they're the enemy. But when they're working alongside the Kurds, as in Iraq with Mosul, they're not the enemy. The Kurds are a useful ally, except for when Turkey invade Afrin, at which point they're terrorists. So, I mean, it's just a complete shit show. And this for me is totemic of all the failures of Western foreign policy. Now, I'm not saying the West is to blame for Assad, but I am saying it's very, very difficult for the West to continue with what they're doing and actually have a reasonable path they're going to pursue here, which is why I think they will continue to screw things up. I think you have to basically say that Syrian Kurdistan has at least autonomy, if not independence. I think regional autonomy is what they want anyway. There has to be a federal outcome to this. There has to be a managed change of the regime in so much as constitutional reform, but that's going to include Bashar Assad. So that's what I would say. And like I say, I know that's going to be very unpopular with many people, but those are the facts as far as I see it.
I think that is in danger of mischaracterising somewhat the debate about whether or not to intervene, because I think to intervene in a proportionate way to respond to Assad using chemical warfare doesn't necessarily mean you have to pick a side.
I'm not saying no. I didn't say
you can sort of try and change the incentive structures by saying if any side uses chemical weapons, there'll be a proportionate response.
You're caricaturing what I'm saying as if like I'm somebody saying we can't intervene under any conditions. I'm just saying any intervention has to be done with the understanding that only Assad can win this, and that's not what is going to happen right now.
Well, I mean, that's what happened. So what happened last year was Donald Trump and the American military sort of intervention didn't have anything to do with regime change. They weren't trying to overthrow Assad at that point or really backing the rebels. They did one quite isolated set of bombings on an airfield, which was supposed to be sort of punishment, basically, or a deterrent for using chemical weapons in the future. And it didn't actually seem like a program to create regime change or back one of the sides. And I mean, you could see if... I also agree that Assad's probably going to win this war. It doesn't seem like any other outcome is particularly possible at this point.
And also, who would you prefer to win?
Well, I mean, I think
a KSA-backed militia?
I think that's a moot point anyway, but what you can do as the international community, quote unquote, is say, for the period that this civil war continues going on, the international community is going to set some rules of the game, and this sort of bombing can't be done. And if either side bombs civilians, or I mean, obviously they've been bombing loads of civilians, but if either side breaks the rules of war or whatever, there will be consequences, and that might make the resolution of the conflict less bloody than it could be.
I agree with that.
I mean, I think there are a few things that I have in mind, which is also how we perceive the Syrian conflict in terms of bombings and attacks on civilians, because obviously that's responsible for a huge amount of displacement, a huge amount of civilian bloodshed. What that also is an extensive detention, torture, and execution program run by Assad. And I think that one of the things that I have been struggling with to make sense of, because I will say that my political learning in foreign policy was during a time where the polarization between the bad West and bad interventions in the Middle East, like these things seemed very, very clear to me in a way that things aren't now post Arab Spring. And I think that it's worth acknowledging that all of us are in a position of political learning, and there are different sources which I found more or less useful at different times. But in terms of that extensive infrastructure and the brutality of the regime, when you talk about political solutions, is then how central is dismantling that network going to be, when that's also been something which is integral to Assad consolidating
what do you mean?
His power at the moment, and also in terms of taking back territory. So what kind of incentive structure do you have to dismantle that kind of system of detention, torture, and execution? What does justice look like? Can the international community be involved in it? One thing that I would say is that in terms of what's the Labour response, is there was this interview by Kate Ossamore with The House magazine, I think it was today, who said that intervention, this is Shadow International Development Secretary Kate Ossamore, also MP for Edmonton. I think she also has a radio show where she DJs a bit of reggae. She, in an interview, and this is potentially quite a major split in the Shadow Cabinet, said that intervention must take place if the UN concludes that the Syrian government was behind the alleged atrocity. If a leader is killing their own, they need to be removed. We don't keep them there, they need to go.
That sounds remarkably like what we said about Gaddafi.
Yeah, I mean, Kate Ossamore's definitely going off script there, because she's not only saying that some sort of proportionate response might be necessary by the West. I mean, we'll discuss whether that's possible anyway. I think there's a real issue of you can have some sort of like idealized intervention, which is not to achieve regime change, but is just to provide an incentive or a disincentive for using particular sort of methods of war. I don't know if that's how interventions normally add up. Obviously, there's what's it called? Mission creep. But Kate Ossamore's gone completely off script, because she's basically saying there needs to be a military intervention to overthrow Assad, which doesn't even seem to be America or Britain's position at the moment. It's definitely not Labour's position.
It's not. And you were saying about what would a solution look like. A solution looks like recognising the fact that we now live in a multilateral world. So you can't have a solution unless you do give some concessions to Russia, some concessions to Iran. And again, this isn't the language right now which our political class or our media is talking in. So Russia now has a naval base secured with access to the Mediterranean. They will not give that up. Similar, Iran wants reach into Damascus. They will not give that up unless they have things in return. So you can't have Donald Trump. I think in May, these sanctions against Iran will likely be renewed. You can't ask these things. We want concessions militarily, move out, stop this, stop support for Assad. And we're also going to put all these, and we're also, by the way, going to keep several $100 billion worth of assets that have been in our country for decades. And we're also going to impose sanctions on you. And we're also going to make it very difficult for you to sell your petroleum on the world market. I mean, this is silly. So, politicians, and it's a strange thing. There's a certain genre of centrist politician. They love talking about compromise. But when it comes to something like this, the word never crosses their lips. Now, I don't say compromise as in, I couldn't do deals with Assad. Well, if you want to save lives after a 7-year civil war, that's probably what you're going to have to do. That's my view.
So, do you think that the structures of global governance are fit for purpose when it comes to resolving something like the Syrian civil war and making decisions around the scope of military interventions?
I mean, obviously not, but I don't know how they would become that way.
I mean, following up from what you're saying about the Arab Spring, I'm a far greater believer now in realpolitik after the Arab Spring. I was far more utopian about this stuff. And then you see, things can go very badly wrong. I think we clearly need to enhance international institutions massively. And I think a Labour government could do that. I think a Bernie Sanders government could do that. I think a Mélenchon government could do that. But alongside that has to be a recognition of the fact we live in a multipolar world. So this idea of, the US and the UK and various states within NATO, and look, I'm not saying Russia's faultless here or in the South China Sea that China's done nothing wrong, etc. Of course they have. But the point is, while we recognise that, we also have to recognise that, the US and its allies can't be the world's policemen much longer. And that has a downside as well. Like the end of American hegemony also has some very negative overheads. It existed for better and worse. So, the proliferation of chemical weapons or biological weapons or nuclear weapons being one of them, especially the non-state actors. So, I think we do need to create a different international settlement, but like I say, recognise the reality of, rising powers in the Middle East, rising Russia. European policy can't be purely about, keeping Russia at bay, etc., etc.
I mean, I think another way to return to that question in terms of are the current structures fit for purpose and how Britain might fit in there is a respect for international law. Because if you're going to have rising and falling powers and you're going to always have some sort of competition between nations, so you can't just assume that everyone's going to have the same interest when it comes to a civil war. Like, you're likely going to have different countries siding with different sides depending on what their material interests are or what their political interests are or their geopolitical interests. But what we should be aiming for is a situation where all of those countries have a shared understanding that they'll respect international law, which means that that conflict will happen on certain terms. And at the moment, there's no country in the world who's can stand up and say they've respected international law. So Britain and the USA, they're sort of intending to be taken in good faith when they say that sort of Assad's committing war crimes and Russia involved in war crimes, when the United States repeatedly blocks any kind of UN resolution on Israeli crimes against Palestinians, and when it launched a war of aggression against Iraq. And it's no one is in a position where they can talk about international law with a straight face. And I think that is one legitimate response to say to the USA and Britain at this point, even if imposing a no-fly zone or responding to this chemical weapon attack would, in an isolated situation, be justified, the fact that they can do that without committing themselves to international law is problematic.
I mean, the USA is not a state party to the International Criminal Court, which has existed for 16 years. And let's read what its remit is. To bring to justice the perpetrators of the worst crimes known to humankind, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And the US isn't a party to that. So, again, like you say, if we're going to be serious about the rule of law internationally, human rights, etc., and we all agree on that, and that will absolutely require nation states and international institutions, then the US, if it wants to be taken seriously, has to sign up to this stuff. Until that happens, you can't. It looks like hypocrisy because it is.
Let's talk about the position of the left and Labour. So, sort of as a quick update, the position of the Labour Party throughout this whole affair has been to not intervene for slightly different justifications at different times. So for Ed Miliband, he said the purpose of entering this conflict is not well defined enough. So that was why intervention in 2013 got defeated in the Commons and then ultimately got defeated in Congress, which was why the first chemical attack by Assad didn't prompt military intervention by the West. The second round of votes about striking in Syria, this time against ISIS, which was in late 2015. Jeremy Corbyn whipped Labour to oppose, and it looks like he'll probably do the same this time round. And Jeremy Corbyn, I think, represents a slightly different politics to Ed Miliband, which is against Western military intervention per se in itself.
He would be an anti-war prime minister, and I think that isn't just intriguing as a slogan. I think that's an intriguing prospect for how do we conceive of intervention? Do we conceive of it at all? Or is there a complete remapping of what this means?
Well, I think there's also a question of when is it appropriate to take Western military intervention on a case-by-case basis, and when is it more appropriate to just say blanket when the West goes into other countries, expeditionary warfare, it always fucks up. So there's no point in us having this debate about, in this particular situation, if America and Britain imposed a no-fly zone or struck at some of Assad's military capacity to deter him from doing, etc., etc. If we think it's so unlikely that America will adopt sort of tactics of war in that very restrained, proportionate way, is it sensible to, like, Stop the War Coalition, which is their position, which is just West out, blanket? And that's come under a lot more pressure during the Syrian civil war than it ever did with Iraq, the Stop the War position, which is just troops out, troops out. I don't know if you think that is sustainable into the future.
Well, I mean, on the specifics of Syria, I just think intervention is the most... I mean, it's almost like an archetype of not wanting intervention, because there are so many competing interests. There are actually numerous very, very violent non-state actors. Like I say, Turkey attacking the YPG now, prioritising that over getting ISIS. We have different interests there, to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, to Turkey. You have Iran there, you have Russia there, all these competing interests, and they're quite fluid. What does winning look like in that situation? The truth is, nobody knows. So I just don't understand, in that context, how you could make an argument for British intervention. If you said a limited intervention, we want to do this to secure Syrian Kurdistan, to make it a sort of democratic enclave within Syria, so that refugees can go there. There's a safety there. We can minimise casualties, etc. etc. I get that. Hey, maybe we could do that. I'm not going to say we should do it, but we could do it. It would make sense. Everything that's being proposed right now makes zero sense to me. And in terms of a blanket sort of rule of thumb, clearly any rule of thumb has exceptions which don't make any sense. So clearly you can envisage examples where intervention would work. Blairites love talking about Sierra Leone. They love talking about Bosnia less, or Kosovo. But I think generally, if you've got a rule of thumb, I mean, it's not a bad one. So, I mean, yes, it's not going to be right in all cases, but I can think of worse rules of thumb.
I mean, it seems to me that in terms of the political imaginary here, we are in a wilderness post-Iraq in terms of how we conceive of the scope of intervention and also the lack, which I think is quite intriguing, of a leftist perspective on geopolitics, which is really striking when you think about how much of the left came through that anti-war movement. Is that actually how that adds up to an assessment of how the world functions outside of these quite, I think, narrow binaries, is that that's not really there. And I think when you think about the evolution of thinking about intervention from that very famous formulation by Bernard Kouchner of the right to intervene, how that is then transformed into this idea of responsibility to protect, this idea of crimes against humanity, which transcend many of the bureaucratic hoops of the UN. It's almost an idea which was presented to the UN to almost bypass the Security Council, really, even though it kind of ended up kind of reinforcing the role of hegemonic powers, is that after the responsibility to protect has kind of been left hollowed by Iraq and also Iraq in the popular political imagination, and I'm thinking about that as the effective formulation here. It's not just politics as fact, but politics as memory, is that nothing has really filled that space in terms of what governments are able to feel that they've got a mandate to do, and what is understood popularly as a reason for intervention or a remit of intervention. Nothing, I think, has filled the gap of those kind of big weighty ideas around global governance. So that was kind of the reason why I was asking that question in this way, and I think what's interesting is that, Corbyn is a figure known as, the left's foreign secretary for so many years. And this has really been his area of interest and expertise for decades. And one of the best speeches that he ever gave was at Geneva a few months ago, is that now there has to be some kind of popularization of what these ideas mean in a fleshed out and robust way, because there isn't I think, much of a trickle down there. There's not a permeation of those ideas. And we keep coming back to these, I think, very binary understandings of intervene or not intervene. And, Iraq has cast its very long shadow, as it should.
I mean,
can I just say, if we're going to talk about chemical warfare and we're going to talk about intervention, what somebody in the comments has just said, let me get this up. They just said, what we did in Mosul or Fallujah makes Duma look like a picnic. 100% correct. Using depleted uranium, some of the consequences that had on cancer rates, on miscarriage rates, on deformities with children. This is indisputable stuff. This is not a conspiracy theory. So this is something to really think about. And again, we can talk about this later on. There's the Robert Fisk article. Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons in Halabja, killed thousands of Kurds, Assyrians, Iranians, and US sort of people associated with US Defense Department were going to these, scenes of war crimes, and because, of course, these were American exported chemical weapons, didn't say anything. They, ignored it. And there was a great joke I remember during the Second Iraq War, and they said, "How do America know that Saddam used chemical weapons against the Iranians?" Well, we looked at the receipts. So, again, it's about double standard hypocrisy, and we're not here to to virtue signal. So, there's a double standard. That's not that. It doesn't in any way help us in regards to helping in Syria. But to add to what you're saying, I suppose we are stuck in a funk, so to speak, in that the left for so long, really since 1945, right, has, because in Labour, this argument was won around Atlanticism and the international institutions by like 47, 48. And we've never actually taken the conversation on. And Tom Mills we were talking about this in the last show, right? About how Labour after 45 was effectively there was a massive continuation with British foreign policy, military foreign policy. And there was never that reckoning. And in a way, I think what's very important now for the left, and we had a great piece out about this on thevironmedia.com, is that any response we do have to Syria can't be like what Kate Ossamore is saying. Mm-hmm. Respond, intervention, forget that language. Let's have a really well-considered, well-thought manifesto for foreign policy under a Labour government, which doesn't just mean a break with Blair, it means a break with Bevin and with the post-45 agenda. Or not. Maybe that's not what people want to do with it. That's what I would like to do. I think that's what we'd all like to do. I think that needs to be the set of parameters within which we think about how the left responds to this stuff.
Do you think that's a possible response that someone like Corbyn could make when he's interviewed? Because when he's often asked, should there be any Western military intervention in Syria, he'll say, no, bombing's never a response to bombing. It'll always cause more harm. And we need a political solution, which, if you're being unsympathetic towards him, can seem a bit like a cop-out, in the sense that, of course, everyone would prefer it if there wasn't bombing. Everyone wants a political solution. It sounds a bit anodyne. Do you think he could go on TV and say, look, in a perfect world, with a functioning international community, we probably would implement a no-fly zone in Syria so that this conflict which is going on took less lives and was less brutal? But given the international institutions that we have, and given who would be undertaking these bombings, which would be America led by Donald Trump, and a bunch of countries who've abused international law and human rights across the world, that's not going to happen. So do you think he could come up with a more concrete answer, which is saying, like, yes, I'm not a pacifist? Because sometimes he just says, I'm not a pacifist, but we need a political solution. I don't think bombing here is a good idea. Yeah. Do you think he should flesh out a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that Labour does well when policy ideas are fleshed out and people can engage with them. And there's substance to agree with or disagree with. I think that always... that served Labour well during the election. I think that it serves Labour well even kind of in a very dark period of the last month. The minute they start putting policies back on the table, people like to engage. And I think that serves two purposes, which is, one, it expands the debate between this very, like I said, a very binary idea of what interventions constitute, and two, it serves the purpose of political education. People are idiots when you treat them like idiots. When you have some faith in the intelligence of your electorate and you present, I think, weighty policy options, you take time to explain them. You've got a good comms team who are adept at kind of multi-platform messaging, and you've got ways, I think, to disseminate these ideas. I think the time is now to do so.
What do you think Corbyn actually thinks? Because there's one option, which is like he has this vision of what he wants international relations to be like and what he wants Britain's place to be in the world. But because it's potentially too controversial or too complicated to get into, he just says kind of like war and intervention is bad. We need to stay out and seek a political solution, which does sound like platitudes. But do you think he's got a more contentful, it's not a word, is it? But a more robust argument and critique that he could be making, but he's not?
Well, I mean, I'll just pick up on what you were previously saying. I think a good line he could say is, I'm not willing to commit British troops or resources so long as the sort of international architecture which deals with these things remains as it is. I think it's a pretty robust argument. It's a good argument. I think most of the public would agree with it. That's a pretty, it's a good basis to start. In terms of what he believes, I think he probably believes a bit of that. It's difficult to say because, of course, he comes out of the anti-war movement in this country, and he was nowhere near power until 2015. And I imagine proximity to power, the proximity to actually, meaningful decision making, which he already has as leader of the opposition, has probably changed his beliefs somewhat. I imagine he's probably more like sort of realistic, but I don't think that's the detriment of anything. I just think that rhetorically that means he's going to curb things a little bit. But I think more or less his position would be what I just said. I think until things dramatically change, when Labour are in government, in collaboration with other states, I don't think he would be willing to commit British soldiers under any condition. Any condition.
I think that makes a lot of sense. That as an answer. I mean, it's less platitudinous than what often comes out. We should get up Barnaby Rain's article, actually, because it was very good. That came out on the weekend. Socialism at home is not enough. It's time for a Corbynite foreign policy. So
great article.
Barnaby was talking about how up to this point, actually, Corbyn on foreign policy has been somewhat disappointing since he became leader of the opposition, whereas the debate has really been transformed when it comes to Britain's economy and society. Foreign policy has sort of taken a back seat. He's quite disappointed in Emily Thornberry, who was saying that Jeremy Corbyn was a Zionist. And that basically Labour hasn't used its position to change the narrative on foreign policy to the extent that it could have done. He takes as an example Olof Palme, who was the Prime Minister of Sweden, who adopted what was like a non-aligned policy, which was basically to prioritise human rights and critique human rights abuses wherever they happened, be that by Americans or by Russians, and as sort of like the example that Britain should be going for under Corbyn, which I think makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, I think that when you think about how is it that you shift a conversation amongst the electorate and you popularise ideas, I think that there are some points of crossover with how you do that with economics, and I think how you do that with foreign policy. So a sense of agency, of control, of this is how things have gone before, where you've had these hugely unpopular wars, hugely expensive, poorly defined remit, and they've been conducted in undemocratic fashion. That's how it's gone before. It won't be the case anymore. And so actually mapping out what due process is and deciding an intervention, I think, is a positive and powerful thing. Labour is doing that. When you provide concrete examples of other countries and how things have been done before, so it's not idealistic pie in the sky, that's also something which I think transforms people's sense of political possibility. I do think, however, and this is a kind of third question which lots of us on the left are engaging with from different angles, is what does it mean when you have anti-war prime minister, when you have someone who is anti-war taking control of the military industrial complex, or in a very different way, what happens when you have Diane Abbott in charge of MI5? These figures who we think of as figures of protest, of ones who have that razor sharp critique of state apparatus, what does it mean when they're in control of it? Do those structures transform our beloved protest politicians, or do our beloved protest politicians successfully transform those structures? Remains to be seen. And I think that it's only when you get more commitment from Corbyn's from Corbyn as an individual and Corbyn's team more generally, and fleshing out those policies.
It's dialectical. It's dialectical, isn't it? I mean, they will sell out and they'll also transform the institutions at the same time. I mean, it's like Marx when he says about, human agency in the world. You change the world, and in so doing, you change yourself. Presumably, that's the best we can hope for in a way. The idea that they would change the institutions and not be changed themselves in the process.
Yeah, no, that would be ridiculous. But in terms of thinking about what those changes mean, and what the points of compromise or indeed capitulation might be, and I think that it's worth as the left imagining that, and that's why I talk about the limitations of the Labour Party as a format, and how we push those conversations, how we change those structures as agents in our own right.
I think one issue which is obviously and reasonably sort of apparent in the comment section is questioning about whether or not we should accept the official narrative of what actually happened in Syria. So the West is saying, in all likelihood, it was Assad who used those chemical weapons. Obviously, there's many sections of the left who are automatically suspicious of what narrative is ever given to them by parties who presumably do have some interest in what's going on. As in the corporate media, we know that they've lied to us before, so how do we know they're not lying to us this time? Do either of you think that we should take seriously the idea that this was potentially a false flag? And how should we approach the coverage of international events when obviously what's actually going on is not in front of our eyes? We're going to have to trust someone somewhere.
I've not seen compelling evidence that it's a false flag. I've seen lots of people saying it's a false flag, but I've not heard an argument backed up with evidence that makes me think that that is compelling in this case. I think that to be critical is valuable. I think to be skeptical is valuable. I think to leap to conspiratorial in your thinking presents problems.
What do you think, Aaron?
So a few things. Firstly, there is a great history of the great powers doing these false flags. For instance, you can see the examples of it in Cuba. They have a history of intervening in both democratic and non-democratic societies, Iran in 1953, Nicaragua, a range of places. Secondly, people have freedom of thought in democracies, so people can think what they like. And they also have the freedom of expression. The biggest worry for me isn't just about freedom of expression, it's also about freedom of thought, like prohibiting even people, postulating the possibility of it being a false flag.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that.
No, but that's what's happening. No, but this is like the kickback from centrists is cranks, conspiracy theorists, mad. On the one hand, in this instance, yes, it may be. But a healthy society has people who can think, things which are at odds with the official line. That's a good thing. The point is you have open, free, pluralistic debate, and hopefully most people are right about most things. In this instance, there seems to be no evidence for false flag. There's a great article you shared from Juan Cole, which I think gives a very good explanation as to why Assad has used chemical weapons. People have said, well, he's winning, why would he? This has been going on for 7 years. So, yes, of course you want to act decisively in certain situations. And the argument it gives is very good. So, on the one hand, no, I don't think it's a false flag. Yes, I think it's Assad. I don't think it's healthy that we have sort of, conspiracy theories. I mean, we live in an age of conspiracy theories. There are even conspiracy theories about Navarra.
All of them are true.
By the establishment.
All conspiracy theories about Navarra are true, even the ones which contradict the other ones.
But at the same time, I think there's pretty strong evidence to show that this was by Assad. Or if not by Assad, presumably if he was ever in The Hague, his defence would be there was another puppeteer. It wasn't me. Could be another Syrian, could be another Iranian, or it could be people subordinate to him, and he said, well, they had the autonomy to do this. But I believe it's the regime, yes. Mm-hmm.
I think we should probably problematise the idea of conspiracy theories being a sort of easily isolatable type of explanation, because obviously many things that are dismissed as conspiracy theories turn out to be true, especially when it comes to imperialist foreign policy.
Because conspiracies do exist, and that's the thing is that, and I think I should clarify a little bit about what I meant about conspiracy theories, because conspiracies do exist, right? It's not just people inventing nefarious decision making where there is none. That does exist. That's the history of colonialism, it's the history of imperialism, it's the history of even our domestic politics as well. Is that we know that conspiracies are unearthed, but in order to do that unearthing, there has to be compelling evidence, and you have to show joined up thinking, and you have to present it almost like you would build a case in court, and people are going to tear into each and every element of it. And that's the position that I think when you are presenting a counter argument of any kind, you have to be your own harshest critic in doing so.
Should we get up that Wang Cole article?
Yeah, please.
Just to go through it quickly?
Somebody's put in cap. Jits410 has said in caps, it wasn't Assad. I mean, see the Juan Cole article. I'm not saying it's Assad, so we should intervene. I'm saying we shouldn't intervene, but it was Assad. So this is not being sort of instrumentalised for political reason. The article, I think, makes very clear why it was him, and there doesn't seem to be countervailing evidence.
Well, I think it's always going to be difficult to come up with definitive proof and to build a case like you would in a courtroom when there's a war going on.
No, I understand that.
Inevitably what happens is that a lot of debate about who did what is circumstantial. It's the idea of who's got the motive. So what a lot of people who think it wasn't Assad would say is, why would Assad use the one particular weapon that would attract intervention from the imperial Western powers, which would undermine a war that he seems to be winning? Which is, that's a reasonable argument, makes sense. What Wang Cole was saying is that actually it was quite rational for Assad to use this in this situation. Again, this is kind of circumstantial. I'm not in a position to say whether or not this is true, but I found it persuasive. So
when I talk about like stacking up evidence, I'm talking in terms of presenting counter arguments.
Yeah.
And I think that
to allow that conversation to happen.
Yeah.
So Wang Cole's explanation was that in this area in eastern Ghouta, so like I was saying before, Assad's strategy seems to be to take these rebel enclaves or parts of Syria which are controlled by rebels one by one, sort of bomb them until the people in control surrender, potentially under pressure from the population living there who are sick of getting bombed. And then under that sort of duress of that bombing, Assad makes a deal with them that they can evacuate to another rebel-held area. And sort of one by one, Assad is taking back control of the country via that strategy. In this case, in eastern Ghouta, that was one of the last outposts of the rebels in that part of Syria. There were 3 different areas controlled by 3 different sort of militia groups. 2 of them, after bombing, left and went to Idlib, which is one of the rebel-controlled areas in the north. But there was a 3rd group that didn't want to go to Idlib because that rebel group itself had disagreements and conflict with the people in charge in Idlib. So they were more resistant. They were also backed by Saudi Arabia, who didn't want to...
What's that, the Army of Islam?
They were called the Army of Islam. Mm-hmm. So Wang Cole's explanation is that this war was, or this attack against Douma was more intensive than in other areas, and also his special forces are seriously depleted. Many people from the Syrian army defected. So he's got a dwindling amount of people in his army. It's not worth him using conventional weapons when his army were dying. So he went in with a chemical weapon to sort of terrify the population of that town.
Also, it was a lightweight chemical weapon. The intention was to kill a couple of dozen people, right? And it's killed 70, it seems.
And that raises the pressure on the rebels in control from the population to say, we need to leave, we want to evacuate. And it has had that result. So that group have now evacuated to the north of Syria. Interestingly, they've gone to an area which is controlled by Turkish-backed rebels. And Wang Cole's speculating that these people from Douma might get relocated to Afrin as part of the ethnic cleansing of Afrin, because the Turkish government want to replace the Kurdish population with an Arabic population to undermine the Kurdish struggle for independence there.
Really interesting article. And
as I say, it's circumstantial, and I do think we need to allow for a debate about what happened. And I think the media too often, and it obviously definitely did this with the Skripal case, is instead of having a debate in good faith about what has gone on. And so it was a good example was Craig Murray in that whole time. I was often tweeting like, this guy's arguments seem very reasonable, and all I've seen is people calling him a crank and a conspiracy theory, and no one ever responded with contrary information.
Yeah.
So the response for the media should not be to dismiss people as conspiracy theories and to sort of say like, oh, Russia are causing confusion, why doesn't everyone just believe the BBC anymore? You've got to raise the game as the BBC. If people are suspicious, it's your job to provide more information and have a real good faith, high-level conversation with people.
But that's providing a well-evidenced counter-argument, right? And that's again, I think, like, treating people as though they are intelligent, and it's not about, I think, propagandizing on either side. And I think that's really something that's essential in foreign policy. How are we feeling for time, guys?
Yeah, we should probably wrap up. Any last thoughts?
We haven't been going that long. What do you mean?
Been going for like an hour.
You go. We're at the end of the script.
Okay.
Anything you want to add?
You know what?
Any big questions?
I want to add something because someone in the comments very, very early on, I think, had asked about working playlists.
Oh, yeah.
And I had some advice about working playlists, appropriate working playlists, is don't listen to music in languages that you can understand, but listen to music with human vocals in it because it's a good way of focusing your attention. So I really like listening to Malian music, the Amadou and Miriam album, Welcome to Mali, I especially like. I also occasionally listen to Mongolian throat singing when I'm working. There's an album called 60 Horses in My Herd by Hun Hertu, which is really good.
I mean, I want to talk a bit more about this.
Okay, go on, Aaron.
Yeah.
We'll take if you've got any questions, put them in the comments section as well.
Because I think much of our audience on YouTube in particular will disagree with us on this. They'll think it's a false flag. They'll think that we're sort of dismissing legitimate concerns. And I think it's an important thing to talk about and engage with some of the things they're saying. And I think what you just said, Michael, about it's an argument for having a much stronger democratic debate can only happen if we publicly fund the media, because good journalism is a public good. A democratic society can't function without it. And the establishment, again, aren't engaging with the reality, which is, all these people, they don't believe the BBC. Why don't they believe us? They believe these conspiracy theories instead. And like you say, that should be an impetus, in fact, to have a much better informed public. Can only happen with a better, more robust media. Well, how we do that, we have to have new funding models, right? It can't all be crowdfunded. So I think it's a very good argument for a massive program of state-funded media. So I think I've talked about the McChesney voucher before, which is basically everybody gets £10 at the beginning of the year. They spend it on the media they like. We should be subsidising local papers. Local papers, the Daily Echo in Bournemouth or the Northern Chronicle, should have local columnists talking about foreign policy. That's what a good local media would look like. We're a million miles away from it. And it's just irritating me that, the establishment, people in Fleet Street, although they're not in Fleet Street anymore, will attack regular people for this stuff. And yet, they're reading the fucking Metro. How are you expecting them to be? You want to have a subscription to Foreign Policy magazine? No. So, it's incumbent on the media to really elevate the level of public discussion, which is what we do in Novara Media. Support us. Go to support.novaramedia.com.
Mashallah, brother.
That's all I want to speak about. That's all I want to say.
When you get your £10 voucher from the government, which you can give to any media organisation you want, give that to us. But in the meantime...
I feel like the fucking, Susanna Reid, and enlighten yous. Let's talk about appropriate working playlists, which was a bad time for that, but it was also good advice. Anything else you want to say
Aaron?
before we wrap up?
We should engage with one or two of the questions which aren't related to this stuff. There's one. What do you think about microdosing LSD?
Microdosing LSD.
We've got that here.
I've got a mate who I don't have any friends who do that because it would be wildly illegal.
No, I've heard it's quite good. I've heard microdosing LSD and also microdosing ketamine, which we were bad mouthing on Monday. I hate both. I think they're both terrible substances, LSD and ketamine. But apparently the microdose can give you a little boost in life. And increase your concentration.
So microdosing ketamine, I'm very, very wary of, because also ketamine just fucks with your bladder and shit, man. I've seen enough of them casualties to be wary of it. Microdosing LSD, well, so hypothetically, I might have a friend who has microdosed LSD and then moved on to microdosing shrooms every morning. So a little bit of psilocybin. And
microdosing shrooms sounds quite dangerous because it's a natural substance. The amount apparently the chemical element is going to be different, isn't it?
Did them wonders. But again, I am not encouraging anyone to do anything that would be breaking the law, officer.
I'm a huge fan of what I call macro dosing, which is you absolutely don't touch drugs. Which of course, I'm not talking about myself, of course. And then you just sort of, you just blow things up once every 6 months.
I believe that's called a bender.
Macro dosing. I've heard it's got really good health benefits.
It's quite risky though, macro dosing.
Mental health benefits of macro dosing.
As we call it, the Gaza strategy.
Yeah. So no, I've heard good things about it, but although we will be criminalising ketamine under communism. It's the one drug that will be not be decriminalised is ketamine.
Always with meaning has said, how about no dosing?
How about no dosing?
So I think it's kind of a vibe, straight edge.
High on life. Why not see God's creation in the beautiful colours that he intended?
Yeah, no, but the Navarra position
Just
is
say
we're legalising but regulating most drugs apart from ketamine, which we're going to make actually harder to access than it currently is.
The Navarra position is decriminalise everything and leave ketamine for like the ambient house producers of the world. They need it.
I suppose if it works for you, it works for you.
Don't work for anyone else. Any other questions?
I'm looking at. I mean, there's a good one here. Why does Ash need a private investigator?
For Anthony Joshua's phone number.
Right. Actually, have you got any other questions here, guys? Feel free. Otherwise, we're going to bump off in a sec. Oh, I've got here. Unhappy Shirla says Aaron macrodoses super male Vite Slotty with those guns. No.
Also,
No,
I'm sorry. Aaron's guns get like bare love, but I've done like one workout.
Let's do it.
Like this week. Look at that. Look at that.
My
That
God.
is
My God.
That's good.
vascular. Look at that shit,
Look,
mate.
the watching's coming up.
That's a muscle.
That'll be the
I have a
shareable
whole
there.
muscle.
No, Aaron's got a shop showing his guns on YouTube.
No. I mean, look, I haven't worked out for a couple of months, guys. So.
I can't. The thing is that mine's basically all mozzarella.
Well, that's really good, actually.
Yeah, I know, and that's all from yoga.
That's really impressive.
So Vinyasa yoga and Ashtanga yoga is actually quite good for.
That's actually really
developing
impressive.
strength.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Wow.
I know. That's my arm.
Wow. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Quick bit. This is good. Michael White's blaming the reason why Britain should sell weapons to Saudi Arabia is because of Trotsky.
What?
Did Michael White of The Guardian
Have
say
you
that?
not seen this?
No, I haven't seen
we'll,
that.
We'll end on this. We'll end on a happy note.
I'll make it my business to avoid things that will actively make me stupider.
If Gary can pull this up, let me find this for you, Gary. It's on my Twitter feed earlier on today. We'll wrap up after this. This is brilliant. Where is it? Here we go. I tweeted 10 hours ago, Gary. I'm about to send you the link. Can you see it, Gaza? This is brilliant. I'm adding it to the end of the document here, right? Oh my God, this is amazing. Just get this up and then we'll see. This is brilliant.
I feel like I'm being held hostage in the Navarra shipping container.
Do you need to go, Ash?
Here we go. No. Here we go. This is easily the most bizarre defense I've seen of selling arms to Saudi Arabia.
But the world is full of brutes we must defend against, e.g. Trotsky.
Keep that up, please, Gary. Yeah.
I'm not employed by or responsible for the Guardian's ad policy, though your free access to its news columns creates revenue challenges. As for Saudi/Yemeni war, it's awful. But the world is full of brutes we must defend against, e.g. Trotsky.
You know what?
That's a strange argument.
This man is published by one of the world's leading English-speaking publications. My Iranian grandmother, who's 90-something, God bless her, she's not going to be with us much longer, makes more sense in English.
Also,
and she can't speak fucking English.
Also, I mean, okay, right, defending the world against brutes like Trotsky, okay, but why does that need, like, I don't know, white phosphorus or cluster bombs when an ice pick did the trick?
Trotsky died 78 years ago. What the fuck? Selling Eurofighters to Saudi Arabia has to do with Trotsky. Sometimes you got to say, just call it a day. You know, it's like Eric Cantona when he left Manchester United. I know my best years are behind me. Time to go. I think in this case, Michael White, it probably means getting off Twitter. Gardening. Tend to the roses. Do a bit of cooking. Look after the grandchildren. There are many pleasures in old age. Being disastrously wrong about everything on current affairs doesn't have to be one of them.
Yeah, let someone else have a go, like us.
Okay, well, I'm done.
We're done?
I've gone for Michael White. I'm happy. Can we just say big shout out to Gary?
Yes,
Big
mate.
shout out to Gary.
Show your love to Gary in the comments.
And also Camille. Big shout out to Camille. The hidden superstars of Tishki Shout.
You know what? Like, actually, Navarra Video Tech team are fucking great. Considering we are often, or I am often shambolic, we work on like zero budget. People are doing it really for the love and also just really high energy and make the studio a really lovely place to be all the time. So thank you, Navarra Video Tech team, for making me feel like I have friends.
Aww.
And before we go, hit the subscribe button and hit the notifications button so that you can, catch every single episode of Tishki Shout. We are really moving.
Treat us the way that weird YouTube racists get treated, right? They've got the money pouring in. They've got the subscriptions pouring in.
Yeah.
We're woke. Love us.
That's right.
New strapline.
We're woke. Love us. Yeah. Subscribe, notifications, and also support.navarramedia.com. Okay. That's me.
Done?
Done. See you on Monday. This was
Bye.
Tisky Sour. Bye-bye.
That face.